When you think about the United States today, you think of a superpower, right? But its journey to the top was anything but guaranteed. Today, we're going to unpack how two huge, absolutely pivotal wars, one for the land itself and another for the nation's very soul, really set the stage for everything that came after.
It's a pretty wild contrast, isn't it? You know, for more than a century after it was discovered, most of Europe saw North America as, well, a bit of a backwater. Spanish explorers came over hot off their success in the Aztec and Inca empires, hoping to find mountains of gold. And when they didn't, they basically wrote off the whole northern continent as useless lands.
That really is the million-dollar question. And the answer, well, it's not just one thing. It's more like a chain reaction, kicked off by a few key turning points. And the very first domino to fall was this massive continent-wide war that would basically decide who got to write the first chapter of this new world.
Okay, so let's set the scene a little bit. It's 1754. You've got these bustling British colonies all up and down the East Coast. But right over the Appalachian Mountains, France has laid claim to this enormous territory, stretching all the way from the Great Lakes down to New Orleans. You had two giant empires on a collision course, with an entire continent just hanging in the balance.
Now check this out, because the numbers here tell a fascinating story. On paper, it's not even a fair fight. The British colonies were all about settlement, farming, putting down roots. And they had over 1 million people. New France, on the other hand, was mostly a business, a fur trading business, with only about 60,000 settlers. And that huge difference in people, that was going to be France's biggest problem.
So this massive conflict gets the name the French and Indian War, mainly because both the French and the British made alliances with different Native American tribes. But let's be clear, this was really the final showdown in a long rivalry between Britain and France for global dominance. And the big question was simple: who was going to control the future of North America?
And the result? Whoa. It was an absolute game changer. Britain won, and they won big. France had to give up Canada and pretty much all of its land east of the Mississippi River. Just like that, the map of North America was completely redrawn. It looked like British control was locked in for good. But that victory came with a hefty price tag.
Winning that war had cost Britain a fortune, and now the empire was deeply in debt. So they looked across the Atlantic at their booming colonies and had a thought. It was time for the colonists to chip in and help pay the bills for all the military protection they'd been getting.
And here's the crucial turning point. The very war that secured British control of the continent also accidentally planted the seeds of its own destruction. The colonists were absolutely furious about being taxed by a government where they had no voice, no representation. And that anger, it boiled over and lit the fuse for the American Revolution. And just like that, the United States of America was born.
But, winning independence was really just the beginning of the story. This new United States was ambitious. It didn't just sit still. It started to grow, and it grew at an incredible speed. But all of that explosive growth created this new, really dangerous problem from within, a deep crack in the nation's very foundation. I mean, just look at this timeline. In less than one person's lifetime, the country's footprint just exploded across the continent. It more than doubled in size with the Louisiana Purchase. Then it added Florida. Then it annexed the entire Republic of Texas. And then it took a massive chunk of land from Mexico after a war. Suddenly, the nation stretched from sea to shining sea. But here's the catch. Every single time a new territory was added, whether it was the farmlands out in Oregon or the goldfields in California, the same agonizing question had to be answered. Would this new land be a free territory, or would it allow slavery?
And this really gets to the heart of the problem. The country was splitting right down the middle. Up in the industrial north, more and more people saw slavery as this profound moral evil that just had to be abolished. But down in the agricultural south, their entire economy, their whole way of life, was built on the backs of enslaved people. For decades, politicians tried to compromise, but on this one issue, there really was no middle ground.
Eventually, the arguments just stopped working. The nation that fought a revolution to be free was now about to fight a war with itself over what that freedom even meant. This was America's second defining conflict.
And then came the trigger. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. Because he was against the spread of slavery, most of the slave states were convinced that he was going to abolish it entirely. So they decided they were out. They seceded from the United States, created their own country, and the Civil War began.
The human cost, it's just unbelievable. Over 600,000 soldiers died. To this day, it's the deadliest conflict in American history. It was just a brutal, bloody war that truly tested whether this whole American experiment was even going to survive. But here's the thing. Out of all that tragedy, a profound transformation happened. The North's victory led to three massive outcomes. First, the institution of slavery was destroyed. Second, millions of enslaved people were finally freed. And third, the Union was preserved. The United States was one country again. So, with its greatest internal wound finally stitched up, by force, this reunified, newly industrialized nation started to look outward. It began to set its sights on a brand new role on the world stage.
And so the expansion started up again, but this time it looked a little different. It wasn't just about grabbing more land next door. The US bought Alaska from Russia. It annexed the independent kingdom of Hawaii, and after a quick war with Spain, it ended up with overseas territories like Puerto Rico and the Philippines. America was officially an imperial power.
So when you really connect all the dots, you see this incredibly clear story. The French and Indian War was the fight for the land, the physical space for the American experiment to even happen. Then, the Civil War was a fight for the soul of that experiment, making sure it would survive as one nation. After all that, it wasn't a fragile idea anymore. It was a tested, hardened, and seriously powerful country. It's really an incredible journey, isn't it? From a continent that was dismissed as useless, all the way to a global superpower, with its identity and its borders literally forged in the fire of two massive wars. The big takeaway is how conflict, fights for land and fights for ideals, was the engine that shaped the nation. And it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? How does that legacy of conflict continue to shape America's path today?